Welcome to Talking Precision Medicine, the podcast in which we discuss the future of healthcare and health technology and how advances in data and data science are fueling the next industrial revolution. In this episode 28, our host and Genialis CEO Rafael Rosengarten spotlights Vibe Bio. Vibe Bio is a new biotech aiming to disrupt how we finance drug development through stakeholder communities and cryptocurrency, starting in the rare disease arena. Our guest is Alok Tayi, co-founder and CEO of Vibe. Alok is a successful serial entrepreneur and a rare disease community member. Come on in and have a listen.
Hey everybody, this is Rafael Rosengarten, CEO of Genialis. Thank you for joining us today for Talking Precision Medicine. My guest is Alok Tayi, CEO and co-founder of Vibe Bio. Vibe Bio is doing some amazing stuff in the rare disease space around community building and bringing the resources to bear for drug development for diseases that otherwise don't get the attention they deserve. But don't take it from me, Alok, thank you for joining me. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, but tell us about Vibe Bio.
Yeah, for sure. So just a little bit about myself, I guess, for your audience. I'm a scientist, spent about 15 years at the bench doing research, undergrad, PhD, and postdoc, then caught the software bug and spent a bunch of time building software companies focused on the life sciences industry. Those companies have raised over $100 million in venture capital, have a few hundred employees, and are doing pretty well. And then started Vibe Bio last year. I'll get into the details about sort of the motivation in a little bit, but really excited to start Vibe with my co-founder, Josh Foreman. Vibe Bio is a biotech company. Our mission is to find every cure for every community. And the way we do that is that we are building a community of patients, scientists, and partners that help identify and vet treatments, initially focused in the rare disease space. We then actually fund the drug development work through cryptocurrency token sales. And so our mission came about in part because when you look at the experience that patients have when they have a child or a loved one with a rare disease, oftentimes they're told by their loved one's physician that the disease, though well known, has no treatment out there. And for many parents, as a consequence, it's a fairly lonely and difficult time where your first choice is to try and beg biotech and pharma companies to work on your disease. For obvious reasons, that often doesn't go as planned. And as a result, parents are relegated to the generosity of billionaires or running a bunch of bake sales. And so Vibe Bio believes that there's a better option. And so we're building this community of patients, scientists, and partners in order to help put the power back in the hands of patients in terms of drug development.
Wow, that is indeed an audacious goal, a big one, and every cure for every community. You said you're starting in rare disease. So what exactly is the problem you're aiming to solve? How would you distill it down? It seems like everything's very fragmented. So how do you identify the initial photon to address?
Well, I think the rare disease space is an important one in part because it affects 1 in 10 Americans. Further, as we start to look at some of these larger, more historically considered monolithic diseases like cancer, IBD, diabetes, etc., we see that they are actually not one big disease, but actually are composed of dozens, if not hundreds, of individual smaller diseases. So I think we're seeing a world where through more precise understanding of the origins of a disease, along with the ability to test and diagnose more effectively, like with genomic sequencing, we're seeing these subpopulations and communities form both around individual diseases as well as within a given larger scale disease. So I think that's the first macro trend we have to be keeping in mind. The second, I think, issue that often emerges is that when you start to subsegment these individual diseases or look at rare diseases, they just tend to be lesser known and have smaller patient populations than the larger disease that we mentioned earlier, as an example. And so there just ends up becoming less focus from biotech and pharma companies, grant-making institutions like the NIH and the FDA, et cetera. And as a consequence, the lack of infrastructure and focus in those spaces, along with the lack of aligned distribution and channels for bringing those medicines to patients, creates a bit of a desert, if you will, in terms of the innovation landscape. So these are some of the challenges that we've seen in the rare disease space, but need to figure out an approach by which we can actually start to scale and develop these treatments more sustainably. If you actually look at the 13,000 plus diseases that are known out there, about 10,000 of them are actually rare diseases. Mm-hmm. In addition, of those rare diseases, only 5% actually have a known treatment today. So there's a lot of work to be done, and that's why one of the reasons why we're really focused on this space overall.
I have kind of two questions. The first, and you can choose to answer them in either order. Is there a first disease, one disease that you're starting with as, say, your beachhead? And then the second question is a bit more generally, and going back to what you just laid out. Do you have, at least in your mind's eye, a roadmap of how to begin? Sort of how do you tackle the chicken and egg of community building and finding a cause, finding a cure, and then getting the damn thing financed to boot and developed?
Yeah. So we're really excited that as part of our launch a few months ago, we announced several partnerships with exciting institutions focused on different rare diseases in the broader space. One of them I can certainly highlight is a partnership we struck with Chelsea's Hope, which is a patient advocacy group focused on a rare fatal neurodegenerative disease called Lafora disease. This is a terrible disease where these glycogen bodies build up in the brain and result in seizures, paralysis, and unfortunately, death. Most of the children who have this mutation in this specific gene unfortunately end up passing within about a handful of years of diagnosis. And so I think this is a great example of a circumstance where we can be a really exciting partner for Chelsea's Hope and other rare disease communities, where this disease has actually been known for decades. It was actually first posited about 100 years ago by a scientist named Lafora. The challenge, however, is that despite the extensive work of the patient community and the broader scientific world, several treatments have been identified, but none have had either the focus or the capital required to be able to get into a clinical trial. And so I think it was this good example where Vibe has now partnered with Chelsea's Hope to be able to bring in existing treatments and in-license them that have already been identified as promising, and be able to then advance them and fund them through our cryptocurrency token sale mechanism to advance them into a clinical trial. So we're really excited about this overall approach and see it as one where we can empower patients to be in the driver's seat of drug development and truly have unprecedented ownership of the process as a whole.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes sense, but it's also mind-blowingly novel and refreshing. Having maybe not done enough homework, I actually didn't see the crypto angle coming, and it's eye-opening. So I'd like to dive into that, even though it's maybe a little bit off schedule. How do you envision issuing the tokens? Will the tokens be on sort of a per drug or disease or community basis, or will Vibe Bio have a singular token that you then use across all your programs? How do you see that working?
Awesome question. We've examined this structure in many different angles for quite a while now. The approach that we're taking is to have one single token called the Vibe token. It's a governance token that's on Ethereum. It's an ERC20. And that token is what we use to help moderate the activities of the overall community. Patients and scientists are granted that token for free. And we then also sell a small portion of those tokens to external investors to build up a balance sheet for the community. It's from those funds that the community can then vote to approve the release of that treasury to specific drug development activities. And so we see the token as a really unique approach, in part because it allows us to bring a completely new source of capital to the table beyond billionaires and bake sales. Second is that when you look at the current biotech venture capital landscape today, in 2022, there will probably be at most maybe $700 million that goes into seed and Series A stage rare disease biotechs.
Right.
So we're able to bring a completely new source of capital that's also highly liquid, that allows us, we think, to be able to open the aperture on the types of diseases that we can pursue. And, most importantly, as I alluded to earlier, by providing patients with a seat at the table in terms of putting forth proposals of drugs to pursue and giving them the opportunity to hear their voices on which drugs we should be developing. I think we truly are giving them this level of unprecedented ownership of the process that unfortunately they currently lack in today's environment.
And do you see the proceeds going also to preclinical R&D? Like you said, many of these diseases, most of them don't have a known treatment, right? So obviously you could busy yourself probably for the rest of your career trying to develop drugs that we do know about, but that does leave a lot left on the table. So do you envision also funding some of that early stage research, whether it's trio analysis and population level sequencing, or maybe more of a per-Lara approach with drug repurposing in lab models and that sort of thing?
Well, our approach is intended to be scalable and extensible to a variety of modalities and disease areas. Our goal is to empower the community themselves to help identify those promising treatments and to be the ones who approve the release of funds to them. We do bring experts to the table to help evaluate and diligence them such that we make sure we're making good scientific decisions. But we truly want to be able to create an approach that can extend to all these domains. So in the case of Lafora, as an example, we've looked at RNA type medicines. We looked at small molecules. We're now really excited about large molecules and biologics specifically in this space. So we've seen a variety of them. Some of the programs we're really excited about are those that we can take from preclinical proof of concept into early clinical proof of concept. If you take a step back and look at the broader drug development landscape, one of the common challenges that emerges is that when you've identified a key mechanism of action and a high potential medicine, it's often possible to get it to the point where you show that it works in a petri dish or that it works in an animal model. But oftentimes you need 10 times as much capital and a different set of expertise to get into a clinical trial. That's where many of those high potential drugs often sit on a shelf. So some of these patient communities that we're interacting with are coming to us with these medicines that have already shown some interesting data with the opportunity for us to in-license them and advance them into a clinical trial.
Got it. I want to get back into this, both the technical nitty-gritty of how you're building. Well, it seems like there are a lot of things you have to build. You have to build the communities, you have to build the blockchain and the tokens, the various advisory boards and expertise, and so forth. But let's start at the beginning. How did you kind of get back into biotech from software? How did you get back to this from where you were?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I had spent about a decade and a half as a scientist and then a bunch of time building software companies focused on the life sciences industry. And so I'd seen from the inside out across just about every function of the life sciences industry how they operate and the types of tools and approaches they use. But as life does, my family was thrown a curveball last year where though my wife and I were fortunate enough to have our first child, though the pregnancy went okay, unfortunately, our daughter was born very sick and spent a long time in the hospital. One of the hardest parts about that experience was that the diseases that she had were common. The biology was well understood, but unfortunately, there were no dedicated therapeutic options available to her. And as a consequence, she spent a long time suffering. I'm sure you can appreciate that having a kid is a life-changing experience, but having one who's sick at birth, even more so. Further, when we were sitting in the NICU, there were many other children and families in the bays all around us. And we started to build this community and set of relationships with all of them. And there ended up becoming one theme that often tied us all together. We all had tremendous hope that a treatment could be found for our child, but oftentimes the gap was being able to get it into a clinical trial. And so it was that experience, both with my own daughter, along with the learnings from across that broader community in the NICU, that highlighted the challenge is not finding a potential treatment, it's funding it. And so that's what brought me to become maniacal about trying to solve this problem. We examined many different approaches and ultimately landed on a DAO and crypto as the right answer. It gave us, again, the opportunity to extend this community infinitely to the 10,000 plus rare diseases that are out there. Second, it gave us a completely new source of capital in crypto that was looking for high potential projects that was completely different than the existing sources of capital available today. And so that's what led us down this approach and to Vibe Bio today.
And are Vibe coins available for purchase now? Just out of curiosity.
They're not available yet. As a few months ago when we did our public launch, we announced a round of $12 million led by Initialized Capital, along with a set of prominent biotech, crypto, and tech investors and VCs. We're really excited to have a long-term thinking, high success group in our corner, but intend to do a broader launch of our token and sale in 2023.
Got it. So ICO is coming. Also, as someone who's goes through and is going through fundraising, it's tough enough to bring together the right investors for a kind of, we'll call it a typical bio meets tech intersection. You seem to have added some layers of complexity.
I'd say there's so much excitement in the crypto space and in the biotech space independently. We were certainly a breath of fresh air for many individual investors and institutions who had heard everything about AI and biotech and drug discovery or vertical SaaS as an example. And so I think what we're starting to show is that there's this unique approach by which these two worlds can come together. that it makes sense to do so, and that we're able to do something that the conventional industry isn't able to access.
Yeah. So I kind of posited that there's a lot of building to be done. There are a lot of different moving parts. Talk to me a little bit about how you started out building the team at Vibe Bio, and what are the kind of core functions that you need to solve for, and then how do those interact with each other?
Well, maybe if we take a step back, one of the questions you sort of posed and topics you opined about earlier are the different components that we have to build as an organization to be successful. Both Josh and I were very eyes wide open about the components that are required to be successful at drug development, much less drug development plus Web3. But what we realize is that at the end of the day, our organization is focused on developing medicines, and we measure ourselves by the safety and speed with which we bring these medicines to market. So we started initially looking at different patient communities that we could help, candidate medicines that we needed to potentially in-license and work on, and use that as the core of our organization and the first place to start. What we realized is that if we truly are able to identify and advance medicine successfully, then patient communities and the broader drug development ecosystem would be interested in collaborating because they too want to be part of that mix. And as those communities formed, what Web3 has shown is that the more vibrant and dedicated your community, the more capital that's available to it. And I think that's what we've started to systematically prove. We can identify and advance, high potential medicines. We can start to build a community of patients, scientists, and partners. And we've been able to already show that we can start to raise capital through this token-based mechanism to invest in these high potential programs. So we try to take a fairly systematic, stepwise approach to developing our business model. And I think the next, 2 to 3 years are going to be particularly telling to ensure that these medicines actually do get to the next inflection point. But also that at some point there will hopefully be either a partner who will take the baton to the next step of the drug development process, or we'll have the opportunity to be able to register them for approval and get them to patients. So that's, I think, the approach we've taken and kind of the mindset we've had. Now, I think your question was specifically around team, and I wanted to at least highlight kind of the broader corporate structure and some of the pieces that are at the table that we need to be world-class at. Team is another really interesting part of this because it has not only a skill set related focus, but also a cultural one. And it's safe to say that the crypto cultures and the biotech cultures tend to be fairly different. But we were somewhat fortunate that, since Josh and I were sort of serial entrepreneurs and have sort of built teams successfully previously, we started out being very explicit with ourselves and everyone we talked to about who we are and what mattered to us. I describe Vibe Bio and our team as a blue collar team. We're a team that is highly mission driven. We're low ego. We roll up our sleeves and do the work. And lastly, we never forget the humanity of the work that we're trying to do. Those characteristics are what we vet every teammate for, whether it be from a software engineer working on smart contracts to a chief medical officer who's going to help us with our first set of clinical trials. That thesis of being a blue collar team is what ties us together, and we start to build with that at its core.
I like that you're starting from a point of kind of culture and values and sort of, I guess, screening for that first. That's the kind of thing you hear a lot about or hear a lot of lip service paid to. But in my experience, there are those who live it and those who just blog about it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, right? Having now built 2 software companies previously, and then now this is my first sort of pure play biotech company. It's interesting to sort of see the dogma as well as the best practices that exist on either side of that fence. I think you see a lot of discussion and thought leadership on hiring and culture, especially in the tech world, and a lot less in the biotech world, although it's increasing. So I think there's just an interesting arbitrage opportunity, if you will, to bring some of the best practices from other adjacent domains, but into the biotech space. But curious to hear, from your perspective, if that resonates or what you've seen.
No, absolutely. And, Genialis works in the biotech space, but we come from software roots as well. And on the one hand, the dogma is that you need to kind of start with your culture and build the company around your culture. And, they say sometimes culture is the first 10 people you hire, et cetera, right? In our case, defining our core values has actually been an evolution. It's been a process with progress, but our core values today are the distillation of what we started with. So we started with what I guess would be a wider net, and it's taken us some years to really and truly understand how to articulate the kernel of those. But I think that from day one, we started to build a company that was a great company first, and the great business would follow.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. And I think independent of the industry that you're in or your goals as an organization, that sounds like having the right people is going to be important no matter what.
Well, so you've mentioned Josh. Tell us about your co-founder, and then I want to hear more about your journeys through software.
Sure. So, Josh is my co-founder and chief product officer at Vibe. Josh's background began sort of in computer science at Harvard, spent some time as a software engineer, and was also part of the founding period of the Broad Institute here in Boston. He started his PhD in computational biology at Princeton, but left early to start a software company that was backed by Sequoia. That enterprise SaaS company ultimately was acquired. He then went to start another medical device company, which was also, I think, acquired and currently is doing quite well. And then sort of as an interim stint post startups, spent a little bit of time at Wayfair leading a 100-person sort of engineering and product team. As most of us who are entrepreneurs at heart, he felt pretty excited to get back into the game. And it just so happened it was around the time when my daughter was ill and I was looking for some advice and feedback on this broader project and direction. And so, we had known each other for about half a dozen years at that point and kind of resonated around this approach and sort of went from there.
Got it. So he comes from software. You do too. Tell us a little bit more specifically, what were your other companies? What did they do? What were some of the kind of core lessons you took away from scaling and making successful these software companies?
Sure. Well, I'll share with you sort of the institutions and then some of maybe the broader high level takeaways from that broader experience. The companies I helped start were Prescouter and TetraScience, and I also started and ran the life sciences division at Ignite, which is a big software company based in California. And so from those three separate experiences, there's a lot of takeaways I think one can have. You mentioned people earlier, right? Trying to build the right team and make sure you have alignment around culture and values. Also making sure that you get the right types of people for the stage of your organization, right? I think that's another key component. One of the things I'd also say I learned was that when it comes to building a company or a project or a DAO, you'll always have opportunities to go into different directions. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to help focus the organization and especially focus it on the original vision that you had. And so I think that was another piece of the equation I'd say I learned was to sort of have self-confidence in the vision that we set out for and to sort of be maniacally focused on that in everything that we do. I think the last part I'd also highlight would be that these things take time, whether it was Ignite or Prescouter or otherwise. These are multi-year type investments and you have to really be thinking for the long haul. It's a very orthogonal perspective to the traditional crypto domain where you are looking more on the order of days and weeks to be able to make a return. I think in our case, we're very much long-term focused as an organization, as a project, and have been both recruiting people and partners who think in a similar way.
So you mentioned Josh as Chief Product Officer. Help me understand, how do you think about products? So what are the products at Vibe Bio? Are they the drug programs? Or, it seems like you could have technology products, but also, I don't want to say softer, but soft tech products.
I think you're heading in the right direction there. We think we've got two different types of products, one that's software and the other that's medicines, effectively, or a process to develop medicines. On the former, when it comes to bringing together this community of patients, scientists, and partners, we recognize that many of these people are not Web3 natives. A lot of the technology out there, whether it be wallets and governance software used in the crypto domain, is geared mostly to Web3 native and tech native individuals. So we're building a user-friendly, we think for the first time in this space, user-friendly, easy to engage with governance and identity software platform for Vibe, such that any patient community, any scientist can come in and immediately start to participate in the broader community. That's number one. The other component of it is that as we aspire to find every cure for every community, we really need to have deep domain experts to help us and identify these promising treatments. Unfortunately, these are skills and experiences that you just don't get in everyday walks of life. And so being able to have individuals identify their own backgrounds, be able to receive credit for the work that they do, as well as the contributions they make to some of these programs, as well as identify their participation, right, in the overall project is really important. So we're really going to pioneer, I think, a new category in the Web3 space where we try to bring this level of identity, credentials, and accomplishments onto the blockchain such that individuals are recognized for their historical and upcoming works, but also can port that to different environments over time as they progress. So that's one piece of the software standpoint. The second is that once the community approves funds to be released for drug development, we do have a process and a team that we're building on the drug development side to actually advance these candidate medicines. And so that becomes another really exciting, I think, direction, another product, if you will, where it's both the team and the experience, but also the resulting composition of matter, if you will, that is also a product. Unlike a traditional company, we do have two different types of products, but I think if we're able to sort of show our ability to make really well-used software that is able to generate funds through our token sales, and then also resulting successful medicines on the back end, I think we'll have truly proven out this overall approach.
That makes sense. And that was along the lines I was thinking, but thank you for making it so vivid and clear. I'm a little curious how you're thinking about both the kind of nuts and bolts of community releasing funds right now. And I'm sure you've got this nailed down, but if there's a single Vibe coin, are there certain amounts that are accessible to one community and certain amounts accessible to another? And again, if once you've had an ICO and let's say retail investors, if that's what you call folks like myself who might come buy your coin, do we get to say which community we want to buy for, or does that go into a general kitty, or does it get distributed pro rata? How are you thinking about those kinds of mechanical issues with the coin?
Awesome. Yeah, it's a wonderful question and something we've thought deeply about over the past year plus. When you look at the different ways in which tokens can be applied to this domain, it's become clear to me that if you look at drug development specifically at a given program level, there is a measurable amount of risk on a given individual single drug program. So oftentimes, whether you're a venture capital firm or a biotech, you end up with a portfolio. You have multiple different drug programs that you're investing in, such that eventually, if you do your job right, at least one or two of those, that portfolio will be successful to then recoup the investments on the others that didn't work. So that's why we took the approach by which we have a single token to raise capital and to mediate the actions of the organization. And then dollars are then allocated to individual programs such that that token is reflected by a portfolio of different medicines that are being pursued. So the approach that we've taken in addition is to also ensure that when you provide this level of unprecedented ownership in drug development to patient communities, it is possible that you might end up going in a different direction that doesn't have necessarily the greatest science, but might just be something that the communities are passionate about. So what we've done is structured an approach by which any token holder can put forth a proposal around a drug development project. But then we have a committee of drug development experts that range from toxicology and pharmacology to CMC to regulatory, who then rank and stack those proposals based on their scientific feasibility, clinical and safety, et cetera, et cetera. With that resulting stack, the community is then empowered to then release funds from the treasury to those proposals, starting top down. So what it allows us to do is ensure that patients are ultimately part of the mix in terms of identifying candidate medicines. They're also part of the mix in terms of releasing funds and allocating capital. But you do have dispassionate drug development experts who are helping to assess the quality and feasibility of those programs in the middle. Got
it. So I'm learning a lot about clinical trials in my work. My company works on developing AI models that can serve as clinical biomarkers. But we work in kind of the big and relatively well-funded space of oncology primarily, because there are a lot of clinical trials, a lot of clinical trial data. In rare diseases, what does a typical clinical trial journey look like for a drug, or is there even such a thing as a typical journey? How many patients do you need to be able to get into that phase 1 trial? Can it just be one? Does it have to be enough to draw a straight line to make it significant?
Well, it's an awesome question. At some point, would love to pick your brain about what you've seen on that front in terms of biomarkers, because I was actually just having a chat with a patient community about this topic earlier today, where one of the common challenges in rare diseases is that when you only have 5% of diseases having a treatment today, that means 95% don't have a treatment or a clinically validated biomarker. So biomarkers are a huge challenge that exists in this space. Further, from a trial perspective, to your earlier point, you also have a distribution of what rare means. In the world of the FDA, a rare disease is classified as a disease that has less than 200,000 patients in the United States. So you could have diseases like, say, hemophilia or sickle cell that are on the larger end of that spectrum, to diseases like KIF1A, which actually has a few hundred patients known globally for their disease. And I think you're going to see a very different clinical trial methodology across that spectrum. Directly speaking, in terms of what we've been seeing in the neurodevelopmental, neurodegenerative, pediatric oncology spaces, is that oftentimes you're running a preclinical set of analyses on a NCE, showing that it's both safe and has preclinical proof of concept. And then oftentimes that initial trial is not just purely a phase 1, but actually is more like a phase 1, phase 2 combined trial with anywhere between a handful to maybe a dozen or so patients, first to be able to show that the drug is safe initially, then to help you identify the right dose, and also be able to show some initial proof point that it works in that population. We've definitely heard of certain drugs that have been approved after that dozen patient study, but usually you end up doing a larger trial, a more proper phase 3 for the registration thereafter. And again, all of that is sort of dependent on the indication, the subpopulation, the standard of care, all that sort of stuff. So, I think that phase 1, phase 2 plus phase 3 feels like a fairly common methodology, although we'd love to see if we can make it faster and less expensive in many cases.
Part of where I was going with that is, one of the challenging things in drug development can sometimes be just getting the trial together, right? So even once you've got the funds. But it also occurs to me, if you do your job right, and Vibe Bio is, in fact, this beacon for rare disease communities, then you will have gone a good part of the way to solving that problem as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that was one of the inspirations for our current model. When you partner directly with patient communities, those communities and those parents and those patients have real superpowers, right? They're the ones who you want to collaborate with when it comes to enrolling in your trial, getting enrollment for your trial. They're the ones who can help inform the right types of clinical protocols and endpoints that are relevant to them as families. And then lastly, most importantly, they also have a tremendous collaboration with regulatory authorities because they represent the citizens within those different geographies. Right. And so I think we've seen time and time again, whether it's ALS or DMD, the importance that patient communities have when it comes to engaging with the FDA, the EMA, and other authorities. So we very much see that partnership as being a critical facet of the Vibe model, and also really important to getting more of these medicines to patients.
What are you seeing or reading about or hearing about from communities on the gene editing front? This is one of the exciting things to me, and not all rare diseases, but many are genetic and therefore may have a genetic cure. Is that something that's also an enthusiasm that's reflected in the communities?
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen a lot of excitement about, let's just call it gene therapies and gene editing as a whole. If you rewind, say, 4 to 5 years ago, as Luxturna was starting to come to the forefront, and a set of other gene therapies like, Zolgensma was getting to phase 3, et cetera, you start to see a lot of patient communities have invested in gene therapies, whether it be in academic environments or at biotechs. But one of the challenges that's emerged recently has been that the cost of developing those medicines and the cost of the therapeutic, combined with the safety-related questions that often emerge, and the fact that you can only dose a patient once, usually with a virus-based vector, has created a fair bit of questions and concerns, right, for that broader community. So we've seen a fair bit of gene therapy projects out there that unfortunately were no longer a priority for their home institution and are looking for sort of a venue to be able to advance. So I think there still is a lot of excitement and interest in the gene editing and the gene therapy space broadly. But I think what's likely to be needed is greater technology and infrastructure on the safety and immune tolerance of those programs, decreases in the cost to manufacture those materials and therapies. And then lastly is, I think, better sort of monitoring of the resulting endpoints as well. If you administer a medicine to someone who's late in their progression of their disease versus earlier, you see very different sort of manifestations of the medicine as a result. So those will be just sort of two or three of the things that I've kind of seen. But curious if in the oncology space, if you've seen anything unique there, and if how that's manifested.
I think the oncology space is generally really excited by a number of different new drug modalities, and this should hold true for all disease areas depending on what the target is and the mechanism of action. But I'm thinking specifically about not just our ability to edit genes, but our ability, for example, to degrade proteins with small chemicals, with genetic tags, with all sorts of approaches, with oligonucleotides. And this gives us then the ability to hit targets that we used to not be able to, right? So we'll see how this plays out. But in cancer, one of the first known oncogenes was RAS, and 40 years later, we finally have the first approved drug in Amgen's Lumakras to target dysregulated KRAS. So it's been a long time coming, but the chemistry is getting better. And I'd like to think that, the winners of the AI for, novel drug wave will have a lot to say about new molecular modalities going forward also.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we've also been curious about is to say, one, can we start to rethink our approach in that instead of it always being a small molecule or a biologic, right? Are there other interesting modalities out there that could potentially be of impact? But also that when you look at some of the pathways that influence cancer and its growth, you end up seeing some pathways that have overlaps with existing rare diseases that are non-oncology related. And so is there an interesting sort of pipeline and a product type approach you can take to make sure that you get a treatment for that rare disease, but then the business model becomes sustainable when it can pivot into an adjacent indication like cancer?
Yeah. And, I'm personally a huge fan of the potential of drug repurposing. And I feel like there was a bit of kind of hyper excitement or general acceptance that was a thing that we should be pouring a lot of energy into. And for whatever set of reasons, and I suspect it has to do with just kind of venture economics, it's become a little less fashionable. It's a little more complicated than that. Obviously, you have things like IP windows and market sizes and so forth. But I think there are a lot of different approaches to thinking about molecules that we have, maybe have known safety profiles, known mechanism of action. And, coming up with the right repurposing scheme can be really transformational. I mean, I'm thinking about companies like Recursion Pharma, which screen large chemical libraries against genetically defined cell lines. My friend, Ethan Perlstein and Prolara, which exists as a virtual coach, has done, in my opinion, some of the most impactful work in rare disease on really a shoestring, but has engaged with communities, engaged with families, and have won trials and is curing people, again, through these kinds of efforts. So I would love to see more of that. And yes, it would be great if that same molecule has a big market opportunity in a more populous disease, but I don't think that should be a prerequisite for going after it, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think some of the approaches that you highlighted, like yeast as an example, as a model organism, are great inspirations for the cleverness of scientists and the approach that biology can offer to perhaps more sustainably, scalably identify those opportunities. Because I think the thing about biotech is that we focus on large diseases, as we should, but I think we assume that we put a large quantity of dollars at very high risk for one program, as an example, where I think what rare is a unique opportunity to do is to say, actually, a more modest sum of capital spread across a much larger number of bets could be an equally successful business model that's more repeatable, scalable, and folks like Ethan and others who are doing interesting things in that space to find those cross correlations more scalably, I think is an important piece of it.
And while I'm name dropping and just plugging friends shamelessly, I also want to point out again, because I like to highlight success stories in the AI and ML space. Tim Gilliams and the crew at HealX in the UK, I think, are doing great work in rare using AI as applied to knowledge graphs to both discover new molecules, but also to find repurposing opportunities. So I just encourage the biotech community writ large to continue all of the above approaches. And I hope, and I'm optimistic that VibeBio can help be sort of a nucleating agent for all of these different approaches and find the stuff that's really working.
Absolutely. I think we want to empower all those folks who have exciting models, philosophies, technologies to have both access to patients and the capital required to be able to see if those medicines can truly help. And, our ambition is that if we can truly make it successful with this initial community and this initial group in the rare disease space, it gives us an approach by which everything we've done is structured in software and could very easily be replicated for other disease areas over time. So whether it be oncology, cardiovascular, women's health, infectious disease, et cetera, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to take this broader model and financing approach and start to scale it out.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, where this kind of links up with my vision is that as all medicine becomes more precise and we do use novel biomarkers to figure out what's actually ailing you, it means that the disease communities are going to get chopped up a little bit. Like you said, not all of cancer is cancer, right? Like even cancer in one tissue may come in many, many, many subtypes, and each of those subtypes may need a different medicine. And so I think this backbone, this software backbone, may prove to be essential everywhere for these, we'll call them precision medicine communities or biomarker defined disease communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from the biomarker standpoint, what are some of the interesting data sources that you've been seeing as most impactful, at least in the oncology space? Is it blood tests? Is it CSF? Is it imaging? All the above?
Yeah. So there have been some cool successes with imaging, and imaging is great for a lot of reasons. It's information rich data. Almost everyone who comes through an oncology clinic gets a scan of generates an image, right? So it's fairly ubiquitous, and we're pretty good at writing algorithms to analyze images, to tell apart cats and cars, but also to tell apart tumor from normal and so forth. My company mostly uses omics data, sequencing data of various omes. The challenge with any precision medicine initiative is it needs to be patient friendly, right? You need to be able to measure it in patients, and so as much as we'd like to have full omic profiles of everything, you've got to be able to get some tissue from somebody or draw some blood. And so, we really think about the biomarker as where is the disease and who is it affecting and how likely are you to be able to measure it in certain ways. And then you have to hope the information content is there in the data or engineer the data so it's there.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I think one of the things about oncology as well is that depending on the form, you have some element of heterogeneity of the disease. Right. And so I think it's interesting to see how biomarkers can be used to better assess and evaluate the progress, right? Not just of the therapeutic, but also of the disease itself, right?
Yeah, we've done some work with labs involved in the Undiagnosed Disease Network. And this is where, and one of these was a rare sarcoma, but some of these were non-cancer, right? Hereditary diseases. And here, the biomarker search is a bit different. You're not looking for a signature that holds up over a giant population. Obviously, you've got a mom and a dad and a kid. But we've been able to help build tools to find genetic signatures of splicing defects that probably will serve as biomarkers more generally because they're mechanistic, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter which gene and what disease. If this is a mechanism at play, it may be dysregulating something. And so my hope is that by taking these kind of mechanistic views and analyzing data that lets you get at that, again, it becomes more scalable. At least that's the hope.
Absolutely.
All right. One more question, and then I'll let you get back to your morning. Again, this is a big project you're taking on. Summarize it for us, your vision, rare disease in, say, 10 years. What does it look like when Vibe Bio is a huge success 10 years out? How are we doing rare disease different, or maybe all disease different?
Well, again, our mission is to find every cure for every community. We were looked 10 years out. Our hope is that we can build the largest community of patients, scientists, and partners. I think what 3 has shown is that if you have a vibrant, engaged community with a common mission, that you'll have a tremendous amount of capital available to it to invest and own medicines outright in their development. If you have patients and doctors and scientists involved in the development of medicine, there's a potential for them also to be the most prolific champions and advocates for it and own the distribution of those medicines. And then ultimately also create the infrastructure and the business process behind it. That's what we hope to achieve over that period of time. And so I think enabling communities and patients to be able to have that infrastructure, whether it be capital, expertise, for any family and any foundation to find a treatment for the disease that they care about, I think is most critical and highly aligned with the vision that we're trying to build towards. And I think one of the outcomes also, if we're successful, is to have as many clinical programs as a large pharma company. but instead are actually both owned and participated and supported by the patients directly themselves. So we really hope that we can create this large community and show that this new approach to financing and structuring these organizations allow us to both bring medicines to patients safely and quickly, but also allows us to open the aperture on the types of diseases that we can go after.
Wow, this is fantastically exciting. What a time to be alive. Alok Tayi, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time in the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really love what you guys are doing here and hope to keep in touch.
Great, thank you.
This has been episode 28 of Talking Precision Medicine. Please share it with your colleagues, leave a comment or review, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for joining the conversation.